Biblical portion of Mishpatim. One of the most interesting aspects of Jewish law, known actually world over as the lex talionis, is an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a hand for a hand. Which actually means, very simply put, if one person takes out the eye of another, his punishment is his eye in turn must be removed. The Talmud, in the tractate Bava Kama 84, interprets this to mean monetary payment. And the argument in the Talmud is a very strong one. Let's say the person whose eye was taken out had 20/20 vision. The damager had much poorer eyesight. Well, let's say the damager was a tailor, and without the possibility of an eye, he would not be able to continue to do his work. So the two eyes are not necessarily commensurate. And that leads the Bible to declare monetary payment. However, this always brings up the whole question of the oral law and the place of the oral law. If the Bible says an eye for an eye, how can an oral law in a later generation go against such a command of the Bible and interpret the words against the literal meaning of the words to mean monetary payment? In my response, I would like to attempt to understand the major function of the oral law. Because normative Jewish law operates in terms of Talmudic law and the law of the rabbis of every generation rather than literal biblical law. In effect, the leading rabbis of the generation are partners with God in interpreting and ultimately executing Jewish law. But I'd like to sort of put everyone within the laboratory of the rabbis to understand in this instance what they were really doing. Because it's significant since it's not the only case of its kind. Indeed, if you read further in the chapter of Mishpatim, and if you read all of laws of damages, including laws of murder, within the Bible, you'll find very often sakol yisakel, the individual shall be stoned. Mot yamut, the individual shall be killed. And then comes the oral law that says, yes, but you need two witnesses who actually saw the crime. And it's only after these witnesses have also given proper warning to the individual who perpetrated the crime, and the individual demonstrated that he was of sound mind and body, and nevertheless he was going to perpetrate the crime, only then can you put him to death. So that the rabbis in the Mishnah declare if a person killed one man, if one individual was put to death by the religious court in 70 years, it was called a murderous court. And Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon said they would always find a loophole and never execute a person to death. And how does all this square with the literal words of the Bible? Thou shalt surely die, an eye for an eye. And let me try to explain. And what I'm saying now is based upon Maimonides in the Guide for the Perplexed. biblical law, the Bible itself, is read every Monday, Thursday, Saturday, and every festival, and every beginning of a new month in the synagogue. And the biblical law is meant to educate the conscience. That when a person is listening to the law being read, he has to have a very clear, not nebulous, but exact notion of what God wishes of him. And as his conscience is being educated by the written law, he must understand that it's very serious to take another person's life. There are many similar serious areas, so serious in fact, that the punishment that should be exacted is death. If I take out someone's eye, no matter how much I'm charged, I can't begin to feel the pain that I've caused the other individual unless I lose my eye. And therefore, from an absolute equity point of view, fairness point of view, my punishment should be losing an eye, if I'm to understand the gravity of the act that I perpetrated. But then comes the oral law. And the oral law has to take the education of the conscience and put it into practice in daily life. And in daily life, it doesn't quite work that way. There are different kinds of crimes, even of murder. There's manslaughter to the first degree, the second degree, the third degree. There are crimes where you're at fault if you weren't driving so carefully, but you certainly didn't mean to murder someone else. And as the Talmud mentions in Bava Kama that we quoted earlier, perhaps his eye is in better condition than the damager's eye. Perhaps the damager needs his eye in order to make a living. And that was not true in the case of the damagee. And so the oral law comes to mediate. Indeed, in the Holy Zohar, the written law is called Dina de Takva, the harsh law, educating the conscience as things ought be. The oral law is Dina de Rafia, the softer law, the law which takes into account the variables of life and the need not to be too harsh or overly strict. And this combination of a written law that educates the conscience, the soul, the mind, the heart, and the oral law, which is charged with establishing a just society, but always with compassion in mind, and especially even compassion for the criminal, without the person who suffered damages having to suffer even more. The oral law with the softer law is an absolute necessity. Together, hopefully, we form a Mamlechet Kohanim V'Goy Kadosh, a kingdom of priest teachers and a holy nation. Shabbat Shalom.